Today on Homefront, our digital and television column where we try to bridge the civilian-military divide and bring you stories of military families. We're talking about the health problems that veterans and active duty service members have begun to exhibit because of their exposure to burn pits. These are giant burning trash piles. They're sometimes acres in size that the military used to burn waste in Iraq and Afghanistan. These were the answer to how do you dispose of trash in a war zone when you can't just run down to the local landfill. There was a new survey by the Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America that has found nearly 90% of post 9/11 veterans were exposed to burn pits. And of those exposed, 9 in 10 said that their health issues could be related. Joining me now is Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America CEO and former Navy officer Jeremy Butler, whose organization launched this survey. And we also have retired Staff Sergeant Wesley Black. He is a veteran of the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. He has incurable stage 4 colon cancer due to burn pit exposure. And Wesley, we tell your full story. It's an unacceptable story. It is also a story of just how much you have given, and we tell the story at cnn.com/homefront. We describe what goes into these burn pits, which is pretty much everything. You told us this: human waste, medical waste, plastic, rubber, food, big screen TVs, beat up Humvees. Tell us, after these massive piles of trash are doused in diesel and jet fuel, which are known carcinogens, and set on fire, tell us what your experience was like, how close you were to these, and what it was like to breathe this air.
Well, thank you very much for having me on.
Of course.
So the biggest issue that it comes across as is these burn pits. If you imagine just a football-sized field of burning trash, and it's pouring out hundreds of cubic liter volume of toxic smoke, and it looks just like a giant burning field. It irritates your throat, it irritates your eyes, it gives you respiratory problems, and unfortunately for me, it led to some more serious health complications. So,
yeah, that's right. You were diagnosed with colon cancer that had spread to your liver and lungs. You were told you had 3 to 5 years to live, and that was over 3 years ago. You have a wife.
Yes, ma'am.
You have a small son. Tell us what it's been like dealing with this, and also the fact that you think you didn't get care that could have saved your life.
Yeah, so it's been rough. My wife is my hero. She's had to take on quite a bit. And my son is 3. He's going to be 4 in a couple weeks, and it's at the point now where thankfully he doesn't understand what's going on, but it's only a matter of time before he finally realizes that something's wrong. He knows that Daddy goes to the hospital all the time, but my family has had to sacrifice so much now. I left the combat zone 10 years ago, and now my family has to deal with the after effects of it because of my health. It's been hell for my family. So it's because the VA failed me personally. It's my story. They failed me in diagnosing me with colon cancer, because I was outside of the parameters of the typical person who has colon cancer. I was under the age of 50, which means I wasn't in the line for a colonoscopy. When I complained about signs and symptoms of abdominal pain, cramping, bleeding, loose watery stools, I was told, oh, you have IBS. Well, you can't diagnose IBS without a colonoscopy, and I was never given a colonoscopy. And had I been given a colonoscopy when I first complained about it, I would have had stage 1, possibly stage 2, which is the survival rate is much higher, much greater. And instead, my body was allowed to continue for 3 years, and now I have stage 4. And you're essentially looking at a dead man walking.
Jeremy, that story it's so hard to listen. You see Wesley, he looks healthy, he should have this long life ahead of him, he doesn't. And one of the most upsetting things about it is his story isn't unique. Right?
Exactly.
Give us the broader context of how veterans of these post 9/11 conflicts are facing issues with burn pit exposure.
Yeah, I think that's just it, exactly. It's not well known, but the fact is that our veterans from Iraq and Afghanistan, the vast majority of them, if they deployed to those countries, they were exposed to these same types of burn pits. And the country just doesn't know about it. America doesn't know about it. Our lawmakers don't know about it. And so that's what we've been doing for the last week. We've had members of IAVA, veterans themselves, who suffered from and inhaled these these burn pits, the smoke from them, walking around the halls of Congress, teaching legislators about these burn pits, why they're so bad, and why we need Congress to act, because as Wesley said, the VA's failed them, and we can't have that. So we need legislation.
We talked to General David Petraeus about this. He's been advocating for it. He likens this to the Agent Orange of this generation. We also, we tried to get a reaction from the VA. What we really wanted was an explanation of how are you collecting data? How are you going to analyze it? How is that going to play with these medical conditions? Just some basic information about what was going forward, and they refused multiple times to do an interview. They gave us a bunch of stuff, information that wasn't particularly relevant to what we needed to know. And, I just wonder what more needs to be done by the government to be taking care of what Petraeus said, called the new greatest generation.
Exactly. And he's an incredible patriot, and he's really worked hard with us, with IAVA, and with an entire coalition that we have, the Toxic Exposure and the American Military Coalition, which is about 30 organizations like IAVA who are all fighting for this, because so many of our veterans are suffering from this. And so what needs to happen, short and simple, is we need legislation to force the VA to act. If they're not responding well to CNN's request for information, imagine how little they're responding to service members that are going in and saying, hey, I'm sick from this, can you help me? And they're saying, hey, well, if we can't trace it back exactly to the origin, then you're not eligible for treatment. So we need legislation that's not only going to force the VA to do research, to understand what was in all of these burn pits that were burned, but the effects of inhaling those toxic exposures, and then setting some presumptions of connection so that if you come down with these illnesses and you served in these countries, then the VA is going to treat you.
Jeremy, thank you so much. Wesley, thank you so much for sharing your story, and you can read much more about it at cnn.com/Homefront. And also, if you have a comment or a story idea for Homefront, please email them to me. We read all of these emails, homefront@cnn.com. We have more on the global coronavirus outbreak